Hey, Dominic.
Hi, Jenna.
Hi. It's 10.
It's 10. We made it to 10.
I
It's
I'm
our 10th anniversary, 10th episode.
I was gonna be like, yeah, we need to explain the meaning of the word an anniversary. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, 10 episodes.
Can't believe we made it to 10.
I
Didn't think
can't
we'd do it.
well, I mean, considering this all started on a whim
Yeah.
with what was it, like a 3-hour phone call where I was just like, maybe we should record the
And we have.
and we did. And we
Uh,
did, yeah.
well, I guess on that note, should we get ready to start the show?
I think we should get ready to start the show. Here we go. Hi, I'm Jenna,
And I'm Dom, and we're both award-winning journalists.
who've recently been laid off.
Our industry is experiencing a seismic shift, and it's shed a lot of really good journalists.
So, where does that leave us? Well, we're definitely laid off.
And we're looking for new jobs, looking for what's left of the industry, and what to do next.
And we're looking at all of it. So, if you're a fellow laid off journalist, a working journalist, or someone who admires the craft, we're looking to build community.
Develop new skills, and try to figure out what just happened.
Welcome to Laid Off and Looking. So yeah, I mean, first of all, I will say that I think that we look different than we did before. Like we're both smiling, although I would like to say because we're both super duper proud of ourselves, but
Yes.
um I feel like the vibe right now is very different from where we started, even though
Oh.
we're both still very much unemployed.
True. That part hasn't changed,
Yeah.
but we've definitely grown. Um,
Yeah.
and I love the fact that there's definitely a feeling of more of empowerment of I think I am so proud of the steps you've taken and you really have, Jenna. Like I you know how much I love you, but it's like you pushed me to go out of my comfort zone at especially when I started out and I'm
I hope
still
I'm
in that.
nudging you. I mean, like, because I know
I
people
let's
who
nudging,
push.
yes.
Okay.
Wait, yes.
Helpful
Yes.
nudging is one thing. Pushing is bordering on dangerous.
Nudging. But you know what? You never ever um force me to do anything that I don't want to do, even in terms of like, listen, baby steps. I went from listening to my voice, which initially terrified me, and then to
Those
appearing on
for people
camera.
with Oscars who don't like watching themselves on screen. Don't worry, you're in good
And yeah,
company.
and then also allowing, putting the video on YouTube. So it's really helped me in terms of, stepping from behind the scenes and growing in that way. And honestly, not giving a shit sometimes about what people think and learning to sometimes. Like there's a difference. And and it's really helped me define my voice.
Hmm.
It's like everybody has a voice. It's just
Everybody has a voice.
but when you're behind the scenes, sometimes when you're used to being the person over there propping other people up, you can forget about yourself a little
Hmm.
bit. So I really thank you for giving me that and helping me sort of find it within myself too.
I'm so honored and I'm so touched. I mean, no, seriously, I really, really am because everybody has a voice, everybody has a story to tell, has been the guiding light for me personally with the kind of journalism that I've always tried to do, the kind of interviews that I've always tried to do. And also, I guess when I really want to clarify between like, nudging you and pushing you and giving you the space to say no, that's believe it or not, that's one of the things that I've found to be so unbelievably helpful in my storytelling career and interviewing career is that giving people the chance to say no actually seems to give them more empowerment to actually do the thing that they might have been hesitant to do. Just
Mhm.
knowing that they have the right to be like, actually, I don't want to. I've seen it happen too many times where just knowing that I can say no is actually just like, oh, well, maybe then I will. I think maybe because then the decision to do the thing is on your terms and not somebody
Mhm.
else's. And that's so important.
And it's also daunting when you think of, listen, I for a long time, and whether or not I don't know if I've mentioned it, maybe I have, but there have been other times in my life where like I wanted to start a podcast. And I'm like, I really want to start a podcast. I want to do something like this. And it always felt so heavy. And this has not been heavy. Once we've been doing it,
Which is wild because it's a heavy
it's a
topic.
heavy topic. It's a heavy
All it
topic.
took was for me to lose my job. Sorry.
I hear you. It
Listen,
really
you got there, and that's what's important. And that is saying it that way. It's just
it's like I do want to tell people that we are doing something at my hopefully my nudging has been to I thought we should enjoy some type of drink of choice for both of
I
us.
haven't even
And
had a sip. I'm stone
I
sober right
know.
now.
Oh, I know. Oh, I know. But I am right now going to open my bottle of Moral Dilemma.
Oh,
It's a stout. It actually is from a, a brewery here in Brooklyn, which I always go to Wild East. And I'm like, you know what? It feels like I think I've had this on my refrigerator for like a year or so. And I'm like, I'm gonna open it up for this show. I'm gonna oh wait.
nice. Something that you have for when you have you drink moral dilemma for when you have a moral injury. And I'm so glad that we learned that phrase.
What are
Changed
you
my life. I
and what are you
have
having?
a simple glass of Pinot Grigio because I am a wino. And I don't know if you can see it clearly, but this is my Jenna glass. Wait,
There
hold
it
on. There
is.
we
I
go.
see the
The
J
golden J for
as
me.
I pour my moral dilemma.
All right.
Okay.
Oh, I took a sip and we didn't virtually cheers.
Oh yes. Well, we could do it. It's all right. As I just all right, ready?
Here we go. And cheers.
Cheers.
Clink.
Okay. Hmm.
Oh, that stuff is stout. Looking at your drink, that is like black liquid.
Can I tell you? It yeah, it's strong.
All right, so this is going to be an interesting one.
Oh yeah. Um so so yeah, this week's podcast, so we're doing something a little different, right?
Yeah,
Oh.
we're going back to our original what if we just recorded our conversation roots and we're just going to have a conversation between the two of us about where we are now, um what are we? We're like 4 weeks, no, excuse me, 4 months into our unemployment, but
Hmm.
10 weeks into this podcast experiment. And we've had some, I think, amazing opportunities to meet and talk to people, and more importantly, learn from people who we literally never would have spoken to or didn't know or whatever. And also for personal growth and for even just figuring out some things on our own, like where do we stand with who we are and what we want to do. And yeah.
Yeah. It feels like a good time to kind of just check in with each other because I think sometimes, you can forget and or you might not always see the growth and everything that's changed along this for over the past few weeks because there has been a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, just starting out between the two of us and then starting to bring incorporating guests into the show who have been all amazing and so
Mm-hmm.
grateful because, you know, I think we both know in this industry, you don't, even when we at the other jobs we worked at, it isn't always easy, you know, booking people, especially for a show that is new and starting out. And I'm just so grateful that people were so positive also to us. Like every guest that we've had on has been so um encouraging to what we're trying to do. Um, and also getting the feedback from our friends and family who've listened to the show, and also from other listeners and viewers who are watching along. Um, it
Oh,
means a
nothing
lot.
tickles me more than when I see
I know.
another alert that we have a new follower and I'm like, "Oh my God."
Mm.
No, but in
And it's
terms
one
of
we don't know. And it's
yeah,
one we don't
exactly. And
know.
it's someone we don't know. Like, oh my God. I mean, listen, friends and family, I love you,
I
but
love you.
I'm
Yes.
loving the people I don't know
Yes.
even more right now.
Yes.
Y'all are my people.
Yes.
Um, No, but going back to what you were saying about the supportiveness that we've gotten from, people who have reached out to have them be on the pod, and even like people who we've pitched to and they're like, "Oh, that does sound like a good idea," versus, people who've been on and we're just like, "This was a really great experience," or "This was a great conversation and thank you for having me on." And um there I guess I don't know. Maybe I am still to this day still wrestling with some layers of imposter syndrome because we've talked about, hey, wouldn't it be great if we could talk to this person or that person? And in my mind, I tend to go like, we need to go lower and shoot
Yes.
for what we can get. And you're like, why not, Jenna? Let's just reach for who we want to get. The worst thing they can say is no, which, I still struggle with. No is the worst thing somebody could say. But the world doesn't end. And if somebody says no, we keep going.
I
It's
love it.
literally not the end of the world. But you have also shown me in your willingness to reach out pretty much to anybody. Um
I am.
yeah, exactly. But just like, why not? And that's something that I did not realize that I was holding on to, is like, oh, but we can't because this, that. No, why not? Just ask.
Yeah, I feel like that's been you know this, like, as my career has, in terms of booking and producing, has always been kind of like make it happen and always aim for what you want. And what's also been great is also sometimes when you have the possibility to go for people, and especially in the past few years, has been trying to book people who mean something to us, in
Mm-hmm.
terms of having when we had them on our program. Same thing with this. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh yeah, we can book as long as the guests come on. We're trying to book whoever we want to come on the show, who we feel like we love what they're saying. We have our own mission that we can listen to now. It's not about somebody else's. It's about our own. And I love that.
Which is also, so I didn't realize that. I can't remember where in the process that finally dawned on me that, like, no, we're calling the shots. Like, we're determining what our, ethics and what our mission is and what our North Star is. And like, once I realized that we actually were the ones making those decisions, it was a revelation on two levels. Because one, it was like, no, actually, I am completely capable of making those decisions
Hmm.
and,
That's right.
shaping the way that we want to see this show go. Um, but the fact that I had never had that ever, my entire career, which again, I am immensely proud of the work that I've done,
Hmm.
but at the same time, it had always been work that involved me somehow molding to or fitting the mold of whatever shop or whatever news organization I was working for. And to not have that is, wow. And I get to decide. I've never been a
Right.
decider. I've always been a worker bee.
It's a liberating feeling. It's like, oh, wait a minute. Yeah,
But
we
it's
get to,
surprising how
yeah.
shocking it was to me that, like, oh, wait, I can do that. Like, that was literally, Dominic, that was like a revelation when I finally put the pieces together and was just like, no, I can decide. That was huge.
I I mean, to me, that's always been kind of, we were talking before we started recording, we were talking about, evolving
Hmm.
as people in our job. And I think that's the thing too, where you start to evolve in your career. There's a natural evolution. I mean, some people, um, and if we're focusing on the world of journalism, right? I think we were touching base on this a little bit, but like, especially local journalism, like, there's sort of an evolution of how you move up the ladder. Um, some people are very comfortable in the lane that they're in. Everybody has, like, just like any other job, people love producing. Some just like doing the local beat.
Hmm.
Some people want, booking. and whatever field, and that's great. And some want to grow in a different way, wanted not even
Well, I
grow, they
guess
want to
there's
develop new.
different. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Finish what you were saying. Because I was going to say there's different ways you can grow
Because you,
because,
yes, you can grow within the field that you can still be a, but I guess it's more so some people just want to then try different things within the field. That's probably the better way of saying it. Like
okay.
some people go from being, like I think for me, I know I started out booking, producing, and then it became EPing. Um, and they all have been great. I've learned so many great things about myself. Um, but I've always wanted to put my voice out there, and just has always been one of those things I've struggled with in terms of, yes, I have, people always say, oh, but as a booker, as a producer, as an EP, you do have a voice, and that's true. But I'm talking about my voice, and I think it's
Hmm.
because it's we all have different things that we carry in life. You grow up, and sometimes being, especially me thinking about being as a kid and teen and early adult years being a closeted, gay man and not having it just took a lot then to sort of you just always felt like your voice wasn't worthy and you
Mm.
just weren't worth being heard, I guess, own self-value. And it always was about feeding somebody else's value. Um and propping other people up. It always is difficult for me to really give myself credit or prop myself up. It's always been a little bit of a struggle there. So I think that's been something for me throughout this whole process has been like, how do I get to that place where, I do want that. I do want to be able to do like what you do and host and have a say. But I mean, like what we do here, you know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
being able, and also being able to do it with you has made it much more comfortable for me
Mm.
to do that because like you just have like, okay, it's just talking with a friend, and even when a guest comes on, it's not, it's just talking to you. So there's been that growth for me. Um, and I love that of what we've done. Um, but yeah, journalism, like it is, again, there's so many different growths. Some people just they love what they're doing. They love being the person who's out there covering the story and breaking it and um knowing the community and telling the stories
Hmm.
and that's great. But it does, yeah, but it definitely is like an evolution to it all.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, for me, I guess the evolution was more along the lines of first of all, most of the shops that I had worked for were, fairly small or whatever. And, with budget constraints, et cetera. So there were so many things that I learned how to do so many different things like editing, audio, video, mixing, all that other stuff. Um, because I had to. Like that was just part of the deal. I had to be able to do all of those things. And I'm very grateful for having learned such a plethora of different skills that I don't just have one skill. Um, but at the same time, once I really was able to come into my own and find my voice in reporting and hosting, um, that was it. Like, I remember right after we were laid off and I was talking to our former EP before you, and he asked me, he was just like, "Well, do you still have red light fever?" And I instantly knew exactly what that meant because, when you're in the host chair, be it radio or television, that red light is on, you're on. And I was like, I do. I really do. You know, and I've talked about this, with friends and even with my therapist. Like, I don't necessarily think that it's completely a narcissistic thing. I'm not going to say that there isn't an element of narcissism for every single on-air person, the same way as like you have to have some level of narcissism to run for president. Not in this current round. That is some serious narcissistic stuff. That
Oh
is on a
boy.
whole other clinical level, but just in general, that's always going to be there. But there's and I don't really I still haven't quite found the words to describe or explain it, but there is something so unbelievably fulfilling on a level that I can't quite explain of being able to, as we heard in, I think, our conversation with Margot Seska, having someone trust you to share their story with the world is like, it's, I can't really describe it. And it's not even like, I mean, I've done everything from covering New York State where we are, to local stories. And in both cases, I mean, it could be something as much as like, um farmers and like orchard farmers or something who are concerned about a climate bill that might affect the health of the bee colonies that they rely on to pollinate the apple trees so that we can all go apple picking in the fall. um or the story that I had the opportunity to tell about Sakia Gunn and her life and her legacy. When someone trusts you with their story, it is such a powerful, it's just such a deep and powerful honor. And then being able to be the one who takes their story and you shape it and form it in a way that you, as best as you can, you hope the public can digest it and understand why this is such critical importance to the person who was telling it. I cannot describe that, but it I absolutely it's just it's very, very honoring to be in that position. I absolutely love it. I really, obviously, I wasn't ready to let it go, hence the podcast. But yeah, man. It's just that I can't really, I'm sure there's a word for it, but I can't think of what the word is, but it's deep and it's real.
Well, I know you mentioned like our former EP, Dave Brown, who was, I always remember when you had pitched the story of Akwesasne, um, and going to the indigenous community, um,
Very
upstate New
quickly for
York.
people who, yeah, you're about to explain it, but
No,
just
you
for
can know.
people.
You
Oh,
know,
okay.
actually, why don't you explain it, and I'll tell you what I want to go. But yeah, I'd like you to
Oh, okay.
explain it.
So by now, I think everybody should know is between Indigenous Peoples Day or Christopher Columbus Day, depending, and then also November is Indigenous Peoples History Month. Um, I had heard through, I would occasionally see flyers for this fundraiser for this school in way upstate New York, called the Akwesasne Freedom School. And basically what it was is a language immersion school for the indigenous Mohawk language. And excuse me, what I found so interesting and fascinating was that everything that I had known about the First Nations language of this land is that so many of them are dead because there was, like indigenous people were separated and banned from speaking their language and sent to these boarding schools where they were cut off from their culture completely. And so um that, and then of course famine and disease, etc., a lot of those languages died out. And finding out that no, there are communities that are holding on to their languages and their tradition, and how, yes, traditions are important, but language is a big part of it. And that much at least I knew from having European friends, where they're constantly just like, it doesn't translate, like the various idioms in different languages don't always translate to English. And that really sort of underlines how big of a role language plays in culture. So when I heard about the school, I was like, oh my God, this would be a great story, blah, blah, blah. And so I brought it to you, and then we brought it to Dave.
And that to me was, it was because I mean, I had gone out on other stories, in terms of field producing, but doing that story in particular, there were a few other ones too, but that one always stood out to me, um, because, number one, being given the opportunity, because I have to say, Dave really, like, we are a small show. And
Well, we
it's a
were a
PBS,
small show.
we're a small show,
We were a small show.
nonprofit, and and he saw how much we believed in the story
Hmm.
and how much we wanted to do it. And it really and being able to go out there to the community with Steve Thompson, who is the name
It was our
comes up quite
cameraman,
often,
editor, yeah.
extraordinaire. And what I've loved is having that common between the three of us, like even when we were covering that story, was finding a group of people who I felt were like me, who respected the people in the story.
Mhm.
And it, you know, always trying to, and this goes for, I think, a lot of the work that we've done, you and I, and I think it's something that that value is really important to both of us, which is
Mhm.
respecting the story that you're hearing,
Mhm.
the people
Of
telling
course.
that story, not wanting to, um, you know, journalism, I understand, is a business too. We do have to make a living. That's part of it. But at the same point, I don't, I think that was to me also about telling somebody's story and hopefully changing the way people see and hear about, you know, culture and people and respecting the people who have been here before us, respecting different stories being told. And I know some people can, listen, I have a few friends who still work in the industries and probably with like, oh, it's, it's a business in the end. And I get that. But I think you get to a certain point sometimes, each of us, and for me, for my life, for your life, I think it's very important that you respect the people in those stories. And we want to being able to tell them, talking to people right now that
Mhm.
we're talking to, we want it to make a difference. And I think that is so important. And there's different sides, and I realize not everybody can do the same thing. So I get it. Some people will go out there and do, but for me, and I think for you, that's important that we be able to tell these stories. And I'm so grateful to have been able to have that. And I feel like that's what I want to, you know, like when we're pitching stuff, it's always
Mhm.
trying to think like, oh, I want to be able to still continue to tell these types of stories and in a different way. Um, and yeah, so I I love that. And so when you're talking about those other stories, Aquasasne is the one that stood out to me that I'm so grateful
Oh,
for.
I continue to be so grateful for that story. Like still to this day when people are just like, "Oh, well, tell me about a story you're proud of telling." Well, now I have two. I have Aquasasne and I have Sakia Gun. And I am just so very honored to have been trusted with both of those narratives.
And for me too, there was the other one, Marsha's House.
Mm,
Steve and I went. That was a different one for me because there wasn't a host necessarily attached to it. So we were doing like a first narrative and it was r- first person and we were following um and it was just I being able, I think, to again tell these stories, that everyday stories that people would not ordinarily hear, because it's just not how it really means something when people trust you to tell that story too.
completely.
And they're hoping that you're going to do justice by it, that you're not there just
Yes, and
to,
you can see that also
yeah.
in them when like there's so many guests who I had spoken to or just, sources who I had spoken to over the years and at first like okay, I'm going to talk to you whatever. And there's a point in the conversation when you can tell that they've finally begun to trust you and feel as though you're genuine. And this goes back to my whole like no thing. Like one of the things that I learned over time was telling a source or a guest or something, if there's something you don't want to talk about or you don't want to answer, you can say no to me and I will respect that. No is a complete sentence. And something like that, it just again, it and don't get me wrong, it's not a manipulation ploy because I've had people be like, "Yeah, I don't really want to talk about that." Got it. No is a complete sentence. Doesn't mean I'm not going to ask somebody else about the subject, but I respect that you don't want to go there. I get it. Um, but it's just like that moment when they are just like, no, I can trust you, and so now I'm going to tell you the whole story, and that's just again, I can't really explain, but it definitely evokes a very deep sense of pride, and
you know
so.
we we've also talked about part of the story that for us, of course, still, you know looking in terms of work and what we're doing. But we talked about this conversation about calling, what do you call yourself? Right? We've talked about that
Oh,
whole thing of, and I feel like you actually had, I mean, I've heard this too, but I remember what got this kind of us both of us talking with somebody, right? A little, if you want to just tell us a little bit about the
so
issue of,
yeah,
yeah.
the I guess the issue was, do you continue to call yourself a journalist or not? Now, for me, the answer is unequivocally yes. I have put in way too much time, way too many years, worked way too damn hard, um, to be able to call myself I guess legitimately a journalist, and we can, I guess, talk about why that's also become a thing, like legitimately a journalist, because it seems like anybody with a cell phone now is just like, I'm a journalist. But at the same time, um, you know, it's also a career path that involves a lot of gatekeepers, a lot. And so, who gets to be a journalist and who gets the right to tell stories and who gets platformed has always been an issue. And so, there are some, maybe far further reaching, but there are some corners where people are starting to say, that's really kind of an elitist title. I'm a journalist. Will tell you what's going on, even though that's not necessarily the case all the time with a lot of people. But, um, and I do hear that. Listen, I've been on the short end of the elitist stick, so I completely get that. But at the same time, yes, we are in a lot of ways creating content in so many different forms now, because if it's not on social media, did it happen?
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
you know, no, you don't go to at least I didn't go to school to become a content creator. And being a content creator is something very much entirely different. I'm not saying that there isn't a set of skills to it, because I have seen people do amazing things on
Mm-hmm.
various different platforms. I think you had mentioned Risa Tisa once. I still am just like, listen, go girl. And I can name a whole
Mm-hmm.
bunch of other creators who have also just like, wow, that's impressive. Um, but there's a difference, I think, between, sharing your life and doing this craft. They're not the same thing.
Think social media has, and digital media have, um, kind of just opened it up a bit. And I think that's why that discussion is happening. I'm glad it's actually happening in a way, because I do think,
Yeah.
it's a good discussion to have. What does being a journalist mean? And like there are times I feel we are journalists and telling a story, but there are also times that we are content creators sharing personal sides of our lives that we're talking about. And it's like there's many different aspects to being, and that's something, we're more than just one thing.
Hmm.
You can be a journalist in covering a certain story and covering uh in doing an interview, and then you could be a content creator creating something fun and silly. And I love that versatility of it. But I do think that for me too, I think y- you know saying it's elitist, I think sometimes people can be looking at maybe the old way of, some people might have been elitist. There have been
Oh, I can
elitist
guarantee
people.
there have. I mean, that's why the phrase, yeah, real journalism exists, which I think we're still definitely looking for the right person to come on and to differentiate what exactly constitutes a real journalist and what doesn't.
And I think that to me is like, there's just like, there is a difference. And I definitely think uh that there was a period of time where we were, um a lot of journalism was operated by mostly, it still is mostly white, white audience, white men. And you have this way of thinking of, we've talked about being unbiased, the issue of being biased versus being, um because I think sometimes people, I mean, there's lots of different ways of reporting, and sometimes opinion has sort of crept into the world of journalism,
Oh,
and there is a
opinion is crept
difference.
into a lot of it. So a while back, uh, in our former show, I had done an interview with somebody from, oh God, the News Literacy Project. There we go. And the point that he was making was how many people don't know the difference between reporting, analysis of a story, and opinion. And I think a lot of people, when I hear people complain about, oh, journalism, blah, 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 and you think you know everything and all this other stuff, and, I see the comments, I hear people say that, but if you read what they're actually saying or you
Mhm.
listen to them or you probe them with a follow-up question, what they're usually reacting to is opinion writers. And listen, there's nothing wrong with somebody sharing their opinion. It's part of the larger conversation that we're all having. And for the record, most opinion writers aren't just like, I just think this. It's not a comment, it's not a Reddit comment thread. Like they have done research to back up the opinion that they've concluded, but um that also gets a lot of people riled up. That's, in a way, depending on how you write a headline, it can become clickbait. And so that tends to be what a lot of people see, and then they just sort of a blanket apply that to everything. Also, at the same time, when it comes to analysis, I mean, a lot of what you see on cable news and even, the show that we had, and even what we're doing now is in a lot of ways, it's analysis. We are analyzing, the stories or the situations that we find ourselves in. And that's what I think a lot of people see and interact with when it comes to journalism. And so it's, oh, you're all just a bunch of talking heads and you think you know everything, etc. Although I think that I hope that we've done a good job in explaining that actually we don't have all the answers. And we've been talking to people who are like, I don't know, I got an idea, but I don't really have the answers either.
Somebody had the answers, we wouldn't be the situation we're in, actually, I think, in terms of the journalism industry and the news media.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing is kind of having to humble oneself a little bit. And, that isn't, I find some,
Well, that could
uh,
also be a thing. I mean, this is also a business of egos.
yeah, but I think there are some people who know their audience and, there are opinion writers who cater to an audience, know what they're looking for,
Yeah.
know how to sell themselves. And also being divisive is part of their brand. And I mean, each of us has a choice to make. Our choice obviously hasn't been that to make that, we look to try and find a way of uniting people and kind of trying to and I think that's and not trying to be divisive and not trying to be there's no not and so I appreciate that type of way, at least for me. And I think for you too, it's like it's nice to kind of try to have a conversation about hearing different people's opinions, and what could be done to like help this industry out and change it, and hopefully find ways of still keeping it alive. Um, but
And make
again,
it
looking at
better for the
and
people
make it better.
working in it. Yeah.
And elitism doesn't. I mean, to me, again, I think that's a certain way of looking at it. I think there have been some who use that. Um, for political purposes, and some maybe who believe it because of the fact that how some people have been elitist. Maybe there are some journalists who have an elitist attitude. That's not really journalism. It's like it's only journalism if it's investigative.
Yeah.
Because I think there are different aspects of it too, right? There's
Absolutely. Yes.
and culture writers. There's different. There's not
Also,
just.
investigative is also unfortunately disappearing because
Mhm.
investigative work is very long, it is very expensive, and, you know, not everybody doesn't want to pay for that because you don't get the payoff of like, okay, and I published inside of 2 weeks the thing. Like that doesn't always happen.
Exactly. It's a lot. But I guess you get to a certain point where you're like, what does it then how do you choose to identify yourself? So that's why I agree with you. Like, I think you shouldn't have to, by changing to a different title that maybe doesn't fully reflect what you work so hard for.
Hmm.
Well, and I know for me too, like I wouldn't want somebody telling me like, just use another title that sort of, it's like, no, it's like you've worked so hard for this. Like, why all of a sudden now should I not use that. It doesn't really
Just call yourself a this thing.
exactly.
Call yourself something else. It's fine. It's more marketable.
Exactly.
And there is that question is like, well, then if that's the case, am I still marketable and do I want to still be marketable in a market that is no longer reflecting what I bring to the table? I don't believe that that's the case right now, period, anyway. But, if that's the direction that we're headed in, that might be a question that people have to ask themselves.
Um, I know we also kind of talked a little bit about you and I were we were talking about the stories, like just looking at how um journalism well, I guess we were talking about how we became interested in journal or what were stories when that we first knew that got us interested in
Yeah,
journalism.
I know
I'm
what you're
curious to
talking
hear you.
about because we've
Yeah.
we've asked our guests that, which I think is really cool. Asking all of our guests, what was it that drew you to this work? How did you become a journalist? What made you feel like I want to do this work? But while I think in our initial
Yeah,
pilot episode, we gave sort of
kind of.
like a elevator pitch of our
Yeah.
resumes, but I didn't. So yeah, for me, I was a kid who had parents who were voracious readers and consumers of the news. I mean, my dad still to this day will make his way all the way through each new issue of New York Magazine. Um, the New Yorker, excuse me, not New York. Well, actually, both of them. But anyway, so, in the newspaper and the Times and all that other stuff, they're boomers. Um, and so but no, I remember reading the mini page when I was a kid, and like the 6 o'clock news was something I just had to suffer through because it was going to be on. I grew up in a one TV household, and so it was something because I didn't really fully understand it. Like I knew because again, my childhood now we're going all the way back to the 80s. So I knew that it was something that would usually get my parents riled up, was particularly my dad when it came to politics, but I didn't fully understand what was it that was getting him so riled up. Um and I kind of remembered the way that some stories were covered and how that didn't reflect because I had some family members, for example, who lived in New York and I grew up in the Hudson Valley. So most of these stories that we would see about black and brown people in New York City were murder, death, scary, crackhead, all this other stuff. But then that did not reflect the people who I
Mhm.
knew it. So that was one of the things that I do remember being like, I mean, okay, but like all the reasons why I should be terrified of New York City. And yet, I remember going to visit family members. I remember my parents, constantly taking me into the city and like I never felt scared riding the subway or anything else like that. But watching the news, you would think, oh my God. So that stuck out to me. Anyway, so fast forward a couple of years, and I think for me, probably what really first grabbed my attention as the first major national story that I was like, I need to understand every single aspect of this was Waco. And yeah, because I would have been in high school at the time. And I'm so fascinated by the story and just really about religious cults in general. But that was my first introduction to them. And of course, it was a huge story. It was, on all the networks all the time, and that was my first foray into that. And then of course we just quickly spiraled into the 24-hour news cycle, and by the time I finished high school I was just like, yeah, I believe that I can add to this conversation. I can, be part of this. I want to do this too.
Yeah, interesting for me, I think I remember being a kid and I loved variety. I loved everything entertainment. And I remember going to with my mom, we'd meet my sister. I think she was coming, I believe she was going to work and she would get out of the train station and we'd go and there was always this I'd always loved going to there was a kind of a candy store, newsstand
Hmm.
shop on the corner, and I would always want to walk in and pick up variety. And because I loved looking at box office grosses for the movies, I loved reading about the industry. Um, then Entertainment Tonight sort of was around then too, and I
Mm-hmm.
loved everything about entertainment. And back then, it really was kind of boring because it's changed. I haven't watched it in ages.
Is that still
Um,
even? No, I think it is still.
oh, it's still on.
I was like,
That
is it
shit
even
is
still
still
on?
on. It's still on. That's not going anywhere. It's an institution. But when it started back then, it was very, from what I remember, and it's can't remember that far back, but either way, what I do remember, it was very, like here's the box office grosses, and here's what's going on in the industry, and um, so I loved that, and I think that was my first real exposure to the industry and also that type of reporting, um,
Ooh.
and just reading about the stories of what gets picked up and why, and here's the rumor mill about what's happening. It was really interesting to me. Um, and I think, there were growing up, there were a couple of stories um, that certainly caught my attention that made me look at what people were doing um, in news. And that was, I would definitely say Challenger exploding was a huge story back then.
I remember that.
And so, um, because that was just so shocking. And I,
You're a little bit
y-
older than me because I
yes,
remember they wheeled a television into the classroom. We saw it in real time, but I remember we were all just like, wait, what happened? But we were younger, so.
I, and I also remember, um, I remember that, but it wasn't. But I would probably say then later on, would it the other two stories, everything. I mean, the next two stories are they're interesting, but the O.J. Simpson Bronco chase was a huge
Oh,
story,
that
and
story exists in my memory as the interruption to the Knicks game finals. That's how, because that my dad completely lost it. Because listen, Dom, I know you're not a huge sports fan, but trust me, if you're a New Yorker and the Knicks make it that deep into the playoffs, you are beyond fully invested. And what do you mean we're cutting away for some stupid anyway, continue your story.
and I
That's just what I remember when I think of OJ still to this day was the freakouts from Knicks fans everywhere.
well, just to say something. So my brother tried taking me to a Knicks game. It
Mm-hmm.
was ages ago because I think he thought if I went to go see it in person, maybe it would change maybe I'd be interested. And can I tell you, I must have been a teenager, and all I kept doing. I remember is my I don't know why this, but I remember my knees were killing me, and I used to be like, I gotta walk, I can't walk. I said I have to walk up, my knees are killing me. He's like, Are you kidding me? He's like, the game is. I just remember him being like, What is going on? I was just like, I was so bored. I was just so bored. I think it's like the last like 3 minutes of the game usually is where 5 minutes of the game is where everything picks up or whatever.
I mean, okay.
I don't know. I'm not.
No is the answer to that. We're talking about basketball here.
Is it a quarter? Is it a quarter?
Yes,
Is
there's
it?
four quarters in
There's four
basketball.
quarters. Okay.
And yes, things can pick, but it depends on how close the score is and where the team is and
Okay. Well, I
what the
don't know.
spread for the score.
They
But
it
anyway,
wasn't living up to the last few minutes of that game. I just was not paying attention to it. Sorry, Jenna. I was just like, oh. Anyway, but I know.
back to
Maybe
your
we'll have to.
OJ story.
Maybe
I'm
we'll have
just
to.
saying that when I think of OJ, I still to this day think of how Knicks
Yeah.
fans were. Even though,
But
I mean, I'm pretty sure the Rockets won anyway. No, in fact, I know the Rockets won anyway, but it doesn't matter.
but I was
Major freak
working.
out.
I was, if I'm correct, I was working at a talk show at that point. I was working at the Montel Williams show. So I
Mr.
remember,
Mountain, get out of my way.
yeah, I worked, and so that was a yeah, that was something else. The Bronco story was big, and also, okay, this is the Nancy Kerrigan, Tanya
Oh
Harding.
my God. Okay, so let me very quickly for myself. So when I was a kid, I was a competitive ice skater, like competitions, skating all the time.
Which I did not
I
know about. I did not know about until you
somewhere
brought
I
this up.
have a picture of me. Oh my God,
Oh,
no,
please
because
bring.
see, it involves puberty, and that's why I can't share these
Okay.
photographs.
Okay, I
But
understand.
me in one of like my skating competition dresses, I was all into this stuff. So I remember the rise of Tanya Harding because she was like a badass and this very, I mean, don't get me wrong, she was also a white girl, but she was like a, I don't know, I'm sorry, but white trash white girl in an otherwise very prim and proper upper middle class lily white sport. And and I was a black girl in this otherwise prim and proper lily white sport. I just really loved ice skating, and it's a lot of fun. It's really it's also great for your body, all this other stuff. So when Tanya came on the scene and was like skating to Tone Loc and all this other stuff, I was like, what? She's awesome. And then the whole Nancy Kerrigan thing happened. And it was just like I just remember it exploded. First of all, suddenly everybody cared about this sport that I most people, like people would watch it during the Olympics, but the rest of the year nobody cared. Suddenly it was like all anybody could talk about. Um, and I just remember how fascinated I was by it was just so messy, I should be honest. I mean, some of the big national stories that got my attention, like I think if I'm remembering the timeline correctly, shortly after that, after Tanya Harding came OJ, and then after OJ should have come the Monica Lewinsky scandal.
Well, Monica, that was in the late 90s, yeah.
Yeah, so
Because
in
OJ, because they both um Nancy, and OJ all happened in 94.
okay. All right, because the reason why I say that is because for speeding ahead to Bill Clinton, I remember by now I'm in college and I'm sitting on my dorm room bed and I had a news junkie roommate. I can't remember what, I think she was majoring in history or I don't know, something else. Economics, maybe. I don't remember. But we were both news junkies. So the TV was on and we were following the whole Clinton trial and just like, again, it was half news story, half soap opera. Let's be real here. Um, I'll never forget when I think Michael Moore had paid a bunch of people to dress up like Puritans and chase Cannon Starr around with his report screaming shame or something crazy like that. But anyway, there was one point where I
That like Game of
believe
Thrones? Is that like, do you remember, did you ever watch
no,
Game of Thrones?
okay, shame of all shames. No, I didn't.
There's the
But
whole thing with shame. Just
I
shame,
know, I
shame,
know the
shame.
shame, I know the shame walk, and it was kind of like that. Like Ken Starr was trying to get right, yeah, was trying to get into his car or something to like go to work or whatever, and literally these like, paid actors dressed like Puritans had his reporter was screaming shame. My
I think I
point
put that all out in my mind.
is that I don't know. We must have had like the evening news on because I'll never forget the Ken Starr report had just come out and they were reading it in real time on the air. And at one point, my roommate and I both sat straight up in bed, like we were both reading textbooks, studying whatever. TV was on the background. We both sat straight up in bed and we're just like, Cokie Roberts said what? Because of course she would have read the bit about the cigar. And yeah, it was half news
Jenna.
story, half soap opera. It was so messy. It was kind of hard not to watch.
Yeah, to go back for a hot second to um Nancy and Tanya, it was a weird
Mhm.
thing for me in the sense of I was not, again, not a big sports person, although I do appreciate some, I mean, the Olympics, it's like, yeah, okay. I mean, but it wasn't my deal. I will say that was one of those times where it was like the drama from it all really, it definitely pulled me in terms that became like a soap opera. And
Oh,
you
it
were
totally
following,
was.
and you had to choose which side. I remember like
Hmm.
choosing which side you were on, even that, even though I knew nothing about either person really, knew nothing
Kind of
about the sport.
foreshadowing to where we are now, doesn't
Yeah.
it? Choose your player.
I knew nothing. Oh, um,
As Dom
I,
puts it
I
together.
listen, moral dilemmas take,
I'm
but
gonna drink all the moral dilemma.
I really felt like at that time, what I did know was
Mhm.
I liked the spunkiness of Tanya Harding, and
Yeah,
I
loved it.
and totally realizing what's right and wrong in terms of, yes, you do not hire, you do not make somebody go beat up your opponent.
That is
It's just
clearly
Nancy.
wrong.
it's as Nancy didn't help herself sometimes either in terms of how she dealt with things, of how she put
Well,
herself
no,
out there.
again, but that was also very indicative of the sport of ice skating at the time. It
Yeah.
again, I'm telling you, it was a
Y-
lily
It
white upper middle class or just upper class white girl sport.
and it
Period.
felt kind of mean girlish. And it
Yeah.
was kind of even in that way of somebody. So therefore, if you're not someone, which I wasn't, someone who was, it, I would be more it's like I looked at time like I could associate with somebody. I could associate in the fact of being somebody who's on the outside. So
Mm-hmm.
therefore, if you're on the outside, if you're the person on the outside, you sometimes hear things a little differently and you see things a little differently. And even in terms of that's why it's so important in terms of how we tell stories. Who are the people telling these stories?
Yeah. Well,
Because,
because again, looking back now,
hmm
the way that Tanya Harding was maligned in the
hmm
media was so unbelievably sexist and problematic and just wrong, period. I mean, even now she's since like had a movie made about her life and all this other stuff, so I would hope that she, I guess, maybe got the last laugh, but the price that she had to pay. And I mean, there's so many women's stories. Like I mentioned, the Clinton thing. In hindsight,
yes,
oh my God, the way Monica was treated was horrific.
I
Even though
worked
she's in some major fashion campaign. I can't remember what it is, but go her.
I worked in cable news at that point, and it was everybody, you look back. I mean, I know this happened, you know, uh, Bill Clinton has had to have somewhat of a reckoning too in terms of how he treated women over the years. Um,
Has he though?
well,
I mean,
no,
other
he's
people have
escaped it.
talked about it. I'm not talking about it.
Well, yes, but I mean the sense of people have talked about him,
Yes, yes,
people who
people have talked
defended
about
him,
it.
whether or not I mean, I don't know how much we can, but I know for me, like, just like watching that story, I remember back then, it was an odd story in terms of like, I didn't, so my family's a little, some people in my family, not all, but some people in my family are more conservative. And I remember the whole issue of morality played a big, people would say, well, do you really want a president who doesn't like, I'm so confused. Like how, and I think it was also how women looked at Monica back then too, because there were
Oh
feminists
yeah.
who were willing to, you know,
Everyone joined in that pile-on.
it was, and I remember just feeling like you think back to that time, being in your 20s and making a mistake and imagining what it must be like to have the entire world just come after you.
Hmm.
I can't even imagine that being in please 20s or 30s even. I mean,
Even
we
if it
do
wasn't a mistake, I mean, consider Sinead O'Connor. That was somebody else who literally the entire world jumped up and down on that woman's head.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, Sinead, I always had so much sympathy. I didn't understand um the pylon for her actually either. It was like one of those things where it's just like I don't get it. I mean, you might disagree with it, um, but I feel like we all should have enough in us to have some. You just don't have to. I don't know. I think some people take it way
I
too far.
I get what you're saying, but I also feel like that's like so at the end of the day, people unfortunately, we're herd creatures and the mob mentality easily that virus spreads so fast, faster than COVID actually. Um and so yeah, no, it
Listen, I was a
what you're
Roman.
saying is also a very much a post Me Too 2017 way of looking at it. Like at the time, we really did not
That's
have a
true.
lot of that language or even
That's very
understanding.
true.
And yes, there were things that even I remember being like, this feels icky, but literally everyone else is down
That's
for
true.
that. So anyway,
I look at, it was weird. The Sinead O'Connor one was odd because I think that one. My mom was super religious and we were Roman Catholic, so the Pope was a big deal. But I just didn't remember. I didn't. I and I'm a person that like I. consider myself a spiritual person. I don't
Mhm.
really align to any religion. Um, but I really, again, I just think there was a point where people take it too far, where people they, for a situation like that, or a situation like what happened with Monica, where it's like their lives are, you know, destroyed.
Mhm.
And you got to look at what did they actually do? But again, those are stories that really did. I think for us growing up and working in the industry too, um, it really did help shape like what, and those are, I guess, some of them are, some are pop culture-ish moments, but they are
Yeah, they
still
are.
moments
And they're
that we
unifying pop
remember.
culturist moments.
Yeah, yeah. So it's interesting
But
to
it's
see.
interesting though when you go back though, because when you mentioned cable news, that's I never worked in cable news, but it it does remind me, I've heard from people who've worked in cable news. And going back to our conversation with Samantha Raglan about um who are you outside of being a journalist, and how I remember I heard the question and I totally understood what she was getting at, but at the same time I was also kind of dumbfounded by the question, because in a lot of ways, this is a job that demands so much of you
Mhm.
that how do you not attach your identity to the title of journalist? And I bring that up in relation to cable news because um, I've heard stories of, people, particularly women, um, sacrificing in a lot of ways their lives, like putting on hold things like, getting married, having kids, all this other stuff because the job comes first. And there's always another story, there's always another deadline, and this. So all of these other things, like they can wait or whatever. Um, and I know that happens to women in other fields, but speaking specifically to journalism, and then I think of my own story and um, how many times I put the job first, like, if this is what the job needs, okay. Like, for example, there was very early in my career, I was working as basically a production assistant for morning drive news. Now, for people who don't speak broadcast, morning drive is a hellscape that starts anywhere from 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. in the morning. And so, because also, like, I didn't have, oh my God, I was getting paid nothing. I was freelance also. So I was taking the last train in because I was living in Jersey. So I was taking the last train from Jersey into New York City, sleeping for maybe 2 or 3 hours, like, sleeping at a desk with my head down at a table, waking up middle of the night, going into the newsroom, and then working my 8 hour shift. And but I was also only doing that. I only had, like, maybe Saturday and Sunday, like 2 shifts a week. Well, 2 shifts a week does not a livable salary make. So what do I do to support myself also? And I looked at a whole bunch of other options, and long story short, I ended up working at a headhunting law firm, where I was basically just answering phones. It wasn't anything that was like super mentally taxing, but that was 5 days a week.
Wow.
So for 6 months straight, I worked 7 days a week
Mhm.
just in the name of being. And to make a long story short, I low key made myself sick. Shocker. But again, just like sacrifices like that. Like, and so many other stories that, aren't mine. So I can't really gossip and share them. But still, so I just so many sacrifices that were made in the name of being able to still continue with this work, to be able to hold on and still do this job so that I can get to the next step, so I can get to. So the idea of just like, who are you outside of that? Still, there's a part of my brain that's like, what are you talking about? This has been everything. It's been everything.
I mean, media industry in general, I think it demands a lot of us. Definitely in the industry we worked in, like I started out in talk, worked in cable news, um, and then also worked in public media. And I think in all three, it's always been, honestly, it feels like a 7 day a week job.
Oh,
it's
of
rare.
course.
It just feels like that's just what's expected.
Your phone's
And
always on because there might be a shift that needs to be covered. There might be breaking news that needs to happen. All hands on deck. We got to
all
do this. We got to
hands
get the
on
stories
deck.
out. Like, and you are ready to jump at that
Yeah.
moment.
And I think that, so with that, I think there is that sense of like, the when you don't step away, when you're constantly caught up in that lifestyle of working 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, you don't really have the chance to really step back and think to yourself, well, what else do I really like? Yes, there are things that people enjoy doing, but this becomes your lifestyle. And
Yes,
the people
exactly.
around,
Journalism becomes your lifestyle.
and I think we're all in this place of it can become difficult to you can get lost in the sauce of it all, of just
Yeah.
like being, this is what I do. And then, when you have a break, I feel like that's why what Samantha was saying when Sam was telling us that, it's like I think to myself and I'm like, okay, she's right. It is about figuring out what else do you want to do with your life, like just other aspects of you that maybe you've forgotten about too. I think how we sometimes we start out and then where we end up are two different places. We start
Hmm.
out wanting to be in this place of journalism, um, but it also you can get lost in it because the
Hmm.
job demands so much, and there are
Hmm.
parts of the industry that I love, and there's parts that I don't. And um, I think that, I'm really, that's why it's like this being laid off, while terrifying at times.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
we've discussed this, producing a show and doing this, and it's like and it's not like we just do this. And it's like we're also, you know, trying to book people, writing, trying to figure out how do we monetize, looking into grants. Like we're talking about a lot of things, and it takes up
While
time. And
also
then
keeping up on what's happening in the news, with the business, around the business, reading in articles, like doing research on the people who we want to book, like trying to figure out who would be the right person to
it's
come
a
in and talk
lot.
about a different subject. Yeah,
It's
no,
a
we're
lot.
both doing, I think, ironically, this goes back to, again, one of our earlier episodes about Predator. I don't know her.
Yeah.
No, I do know her because I'm doing like six jobs
Yes.
easily.
And so you do want to, I think, figure out like what it is that who else am I that I'm, I think wanting to still do the job and find a way of still doing the skill sets that we have and how it translates to different things. And I think for us, it's been this, doing the podcast is something that we both really want to make work and do
Yeah.
something with because we see a value in it. We see a way of giving back in it, of telling other, and also we see ownership of ourselves in it too. Like I love the fact that we own this and that we are, what I mean, how we're doing this on our terms. It'd just be nice to make some money from it. But I also realize too that takes time. Things don't always happen um on our time. We have to figure out yeah, and I think that's
Oh my
part of
God,
this
I'm
process too.
so like, yes, I know
I
things
know,
don't happen on my timeline, but girl,
but I know, Jenna, I know. It's like but I don't know what that means. I think that that's why we keep pushing away doing this and wanting to bring people on and talk about these topics. And I think we're, again, talk about ourselves too in terms of how we fit into this, because I know there are other people out there who are doing the exact same thing, whether it isn't journalism or not. We're all in the same space of, with the layoffs happening, and sometimes not even about being laid off. Sometimes it's just about being in a place in your life where you realize
some
you have
people
to
are
pivot.
legit like in, yeah, career pivots. We're just like, whatever this career was that they had built for themselves is
Yes.
not working anymore, and I desperately need to do something else. Um, Again, that was not me, but that's neither here nor there right now.
But it's given you this opportunity too, and it's given me this opportunity of maybe not what we wanted, how we wanted to go, but it has given us this now an opportunity of kind of trying to figure out how we
Mm.
how we still can keep that piece of ourselves of what we love doing, being inquisitive. Um, being wanting to be storytellers. And I feel like
Mm-hmm.
we do that, whether it's talking to our guests, talking to each other, we like sharing that. And I
Mm-hmm.
think hopefully that's something that, I'm looking forward to continue doing this with you and keeping that
So
up.
am I. So am I.
So we gotta get more people listening.
I know. Well, listen, I mean, like I said, excuse me, as I have engaged in the enrichment project of learning how to, get a podcast out and get it out to the different platforms, etc. I've started to see some difference.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so hopefully as this, grows and changes, like just like the mediums changed too, you and I
Mm-hmm.
discussed this really about, which I think is so funny because we were talking about how we consume media, and I think you still have traditional TV, right? You still have cable.
Yes, I do. I know. So many people would be like, "Oh my God, you have cable." I guess I am solidly Gen X. And yeah, like I don't know. It's just I like being able to watch like traditional TV. I'm still old like that.
I'm older Gen X, and
I know.
and it's not that I don't. I think I just things I I don't know. It sort of just is. It's interesting to me. Like I love streaming. I love not. I love being able to decide on my own timeline or finding things out. You know what I mean? Like I don't really have like a set schedule. If I want to watch the news, like there are things that I will watch, whether it be on um you know, finding it on the app, whatever platform I have, and or if it's YouTube or it's looking on online and trying to find stories or but yeah, it's so interesting. I don't really miss it in that traditional way. Um, have you seen yourself like wean off of that schedule, or do you feel like, are you still set and like, has it always maintained? Has it been a steady maintenance of like what you like having? Because like, for me, what I have on the background is always like podcasts or something like that. I don't really have television on the background. If I have anything on the background, it's usually a podcast or maybe music, but
Well, it
most,
depends. I mean, like, because I still also listen to the radio. Like, I still start my mornings with Morning Edition, which I like hearing in real time. I can stream it or I can, like radio dial it in or whatever, but um, so that's still part like there's I guess I don't know. Like, I mean, because also the same thing for All Things Considered, which I also like listening to in real time.
hmm,
Am I always like, there ready to catch it when it starts? No. But when I am, is that something that I like being able to tune into? I don't know. It like there's something, and maybe because I produced the show at one point, there's like a rhythm to my day. Like this time of the day, this show is on. And it just like, I don't know, signals to, I don't know, maybe my nervous system or something that
hmm,
we're in a certain part of the day. And I probably feel a similar way about like, the evening news or something like that.
mm,
Like it just I don't like I don't know, like for me, for whatever reason, I haven't gotten there yet. And maybe because I don't know, I'm not broke enough yet, but at the rate we're going, I might get there. That yeah, like, the evening news is something that happens at, 6 or the evening world news happens at 7 o'clock. And if I miss it, then I miss it.
right.
Like the idea of just like I'll stream it. No, it's over. Like I still think in a very analog way when it comes to broadcast. Like
It's almost like, so
for
if it's happened, then you moved on, and it's like, well, it's happened because
yes,
it's
but
no
I don't
longer.
think that way about streaming stuff. Like,
Yeah,
for the podcasts I listen to, like I just got an alert on my phone that another podcast dropped. I'll get to it. I definitely want
podcast
to listen to it. I'll get to it. Or, if there's like a streaming show, like sometimes I'll let 4 or 5 episodes, a couple of weeks build up so then I can just binge.
depends. Yes, that depends. Podcasts, I think, yeah, that's become because I do like I'll watch for when they drop, and I'm like, that's why sometimes we'll talk about, you know, I know like you'll drop it like at noon, and you'll be like, I wonder if people like pay attention. Like, do you think it's okay? I think you were talking about like we were talking about dropping week nine's episode, and you're like, think it's okay if I drop it the day before because we have something going on, and I was like, yeah,
Yeah,
why?
I
I mean,
think it'll be fine. I
I think it'll
think
be
it will be
fine.
fine. Yeah.
But I will say for me, like there are certain podcasts that I'm like, where's the episode? I'm refreshing. I'm like, where's the episode? Where is it? I'm talking about you, big picture, or I'm talking about you. There's some of them where I'm like, where's the damn episode? I need to see it now. And so you get to a certain place where um but I understand what you're saying about the news aspect. That's very different. I think like, yeah, I don't even that part of it is it's just different. Maybe there are certain people I'll go to. It's so funny that you talked about even like I know for both of us, like WNYC in New York is a really big radio station. For me, like
Hmm.
Brian Lair is like someone who, of course, if there's something happening, I will um definitely
Tune
go to
in. Yeah.
him because I feel like I will get, and I also always feel like I'm getting a fair um balanced news, even for breaking story, which when you look at certain news outlets, that's not always, especially in cable. Well, I don't want to just pick on cable, but there's lots of news outlets, I guess, that sometimes being first is all that matters. And I think when you look to certain outlets, like I appreciate somebody like Brian and certain other outlets where it's like their whole thing is we want to get the story right, or we want to make sure the
Yeah.
information we're putting out there is correct. And we have, and I appreciate that.
Well, that's one of the things that I've always loved about public media
Mm,
is that tends to, I mean, listen, there are always going to be breaking news situations for any market, but they tend to lean more towards getting the story right than necessarily just getting something on
being
and
first.
yeah,
Yeah,
being first.
agree. Um, okay, Jenna, I don't know. Anything else you want to talk about, or I feel like this has
Other
been
than,
good.
this has been great. One more cheers, shall we?
Oh
Here we
yeah.
go. Clink.
Link.
There we go. Yeah, no, I this has been absolutely great, Dom. I am so glad that we did this, and I am slowly getting more comfortable with I don't know what the future holds, but I do trust that we will somehow find a way to continue.
Same here. I'm looking forward to the next episodes. We have future guests. We have a plan for future episodes. We have other people
We have
coming
a
on.
lot of big ideas, actually.
Yes, we do. We do.
So
And also,
yeah.
this more the light is hitting me right now.
All right. Well, then on
I'm
that
being
note, before
real.
it gets really sloppy, we're going to wrap it up. Everybody, thank you so much for rocking with us for 10 whole episodes. If you've just discovered and you're kind of curious about what we said, feel free to go back and listen. But we really, really immensely appreciate it. So thank you so much.
Whatever Jenna said.
All right. The moral of the limb
Bye,
is
everyone.
in. Bye, you guys.
Bye.
Laid Off and Looking is an independent podcast conceived of and created by Dominic Camia and Jenna Flanagan. Music provided by Jay Cowett. Research by Lori Rothenbucker. Reach out to us anytime at layoffandlookingpod@gmail.com. New episodes drop every Friday at noon. I felt something in my throat. Let me try one more time. Here we go. In 3, 2, 1. Laid Off and Looking is an independent podcast conceived of and created by Jenna Flanagan and Dominic Camia. Music provided by Jay Cowett. Research by Lori Rothenbucker. Reach out to us anytime at layoffandlookingpod@gmail.com. New episodes drop every Friday at noon.